regions to summon us.
Who are you?
Explorers in the further regions of experience. Demons to some, angels to others.
It was a mistake!
You solved the box. We came. Now you must come with us. Taste our pleasures.
Please, go away,
Oh, no tears, please. It's a waste of good suffering.
Don't break God! He escaped you!
Nobody escapes us.
He did, I see him! We knew him! And you can make him back!
I want to hear him confess himself. Then, maybe... we'll tear your soul apart.
Shh! It's the Film Flamers.
Hey guys, I'm Chris.
Hey everybody, I'm Robert.
And we're the Film Flamers.
And in the month of February, we only like to cover the most romantic of horror films. So of course, this month we're talking about BDSM.
And Hellraiser.
With Hellraiser. A film so scrumptious in its romance, it just rips at the flesh.
Hellraiser is a 1987 British supernatural horror film written and directed by Clive Barker himself in his directorial debut. The film is based on Barker's 1986 novella, The Hellbound Heart, and its plot focuses on a mystical puzzle box which summons the Cenobites, a group of extra-dimensional sadomasochistic beings who do not differentiate between pain and pleasure.
The film stars Andrew Robinson, Claire Higgins, Sean Chapman, Ashley Lawrence as Final Girl Christie, and Doug Bradley as the lead Cenobite eventually known as Pinhead. The score was composed by Christopher Young, who replaced the electronic music group Coil, who the director had handpicked. Some of the original themes were reworked by Young into his new score.
Barker had been dismayed at prior adaptations of his work and wanted to helm one for himself. Producer Christopher Figg agreed to produce his screenplay, and New World Pictures agreed to fund. It was clear on set that it was Barker's first time behind the camera.
Okay, listeners.
We have such sights to show you.
This is Hellraiser.
I have seen the future of horror. His name is Clive Barker. Hellraiser. Beyond any terror you have imagined. A nightmare.
No!
Unlike anything you have witnessed, is born. Because within these walls, the unholy is unleashed. Hellraiser, a film by Clive Barker.
We'll tear your soul apart.
Sexual deviant Frank Cotton, played by Sean Chapman, has grown tired of the pleasures of Earth, having experienced all that he can in the world he knows. He tracks down a mysterious puzzle box that's said to open a gateway to a realm of otherworldly pleasures. He takes the box to his old family home and attempts to sweatily solve it in the attic. Once he does, hooked chains appear and rip into his flesh. A black-robed figure with pins driven into his head, known as Pinhead, played by Doug Bradley, returns the box to its original state and the room returns to normal. Or does it? Sometime later, Frank's brother Larry, played by Andrew Robinson, and his second wife, Julia, played by Claire Higgins, move into the deserted home. Larry's daughter, Kirsty, played by Ashley Lawrence, has decided to live on her own. She gets a job, but keeps having encounters with a strange, vagrant man. During the move-in, Larry and Julia find that Frank must have been there at some point. Julia daydreams about the time she first met Frank, and they boned. She has since become obsessed with him, as he gave her the best dick she's ever had. While moving a mattress into the house, Larry cuts his hand on a rusty nail protruding from the wall and runs upstairs to the attic, where Julia is still thinking about that dick. His blood falls onto the floor and pools into a desiccated heart below the floorboards. While Julia rushes Larry to the hospital for stitches, Frank is resurrected as a skinless corpse, played by Oliver Smith, whom Julia discovers upon their return. Frank explains to Julia that he had exhausted all earthly sensory experiences and tells her all about the puzzle box. He explains that when he solved the puzzle, beings called Cenobites were unleashed to subject him to the extremes of sadomasochism and skin loss. Frank believes that Larry's blood is what brought him back, allowing him to escape the Cenobites. Super thirsty for his dick, Julia agrees to lure men to the house under the pretense of sex, so Frank can drain their life force and regenerate his body. One day, Kirsty sees Julia leading a man into the house while her father's away. She follows inside and catches Frank feeding on his life force. He comes at her, but she grabs the puzzle box off the floor and throws it out the window, creating enough distraction for her to escape the house and grab the box. She passes out as she flees and wakes in a hospital. Kirsty solves the box, and 4 Cenobites are summoned. Pinhead, the apparent leader, tells her that they are seen as angels to some, demons to others, and they are explorers from another, darker dimension seeking carnal experiences, and they can no longer differentiate between pleasure and pain. They attempt to force Kirsty to come with them, but she convinces them to maybe spare her by getting Frank to confess to escaping them. They warn her against any trickery, though, or they'll
Tear her soul apart.
Kirsty returns to the house where Frank has killed her father, Larry, and assumed his identity by wearing his skin. Julia shows Kirsty Larry's flayed corpse, pretending it's Frank's. Julia leaves the attic, and the Cenobites appear. They're not fooled by this trick, and demand the man who committed the flaying. Kirsty escapes, but is cornered by Frank and Julia. Frank reveals his true identity to Kirsty and comes on to her. Come to Daddy.
Come to Daddy.
His advances are rejected, so he decides to drain her to complete his rejuvenation. Kirsty suddenly moves out of the way, causing Frank to stab Julia, draining her instead. Nothing personal. Frank chases Kirsty back to the attic and confesses to killing her father. After hearing this, the Cenobites reappear and ensnare him with their chains of fools.
Chains.
They tear his body and soul apart as he recites the shortest Bible verse ever. Jesus wept. With Frank out of the picture, the Cenobites decide, why the fuck not, and try to take Kirsty to their BDSM paradise. But she's just not having it. She rips the puzzle box from Julia's cold, dead hands and unsolves it, banishing the Cenobites back to their sexy hell world, where every cast member from The Matrix wants their coats back. Kirsty's boyfriend conveniently shows up, after she's done all the work, to save her. They escape the collapsing house. Giant demon scorpion baby be damned.
What even is that?
Afterwards, Kirsty and her boyfriend throw the puzzle box in the middle of a fire they've set in an abandoned lot. But before it can burn, the stalker vagrant from earlier walks into the fire and picks it up. He transforms into a winged demon-like creature and flies away. The box ends up back into the hands of the merchant, who prepares to sell it to yet another horny deviant.
What's your pleasure, sir?
The end.
Question mark. Horny deviant.
We'll tear this synopsis apart.
We have such synopses to read you. Hellraiser was released in Great Britain on September the 10th, 1987, and was released in the US 8 days later, the same weekend as Fatal Attraction, another of our Valentine's deep dives. The film took in $5.6 million opening weekend, securing the number 3 spot at the box office. It would hold that spot the following week, but would fall down the list throughout October. It would eventually gross $14.6 million against a reported budget of $1 million.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like that's not a lot of money, but it's still compared to what it actually was made for.
Yeah, well, in 1987 money, I think that's pretty high for an unfranchised horror film.
Sure, yeah. So. The film was initially banned in Ontario, Canada because of its brutal graphic violence, with bloodletting throughout, horror, degradation, and torture. New World Pictures was eventually able to cut 40 seconds of the film to secure that Canadian release, namely a scene of squirming rats nailed to a wall. Really? That's the scene they banned?
I know, out of all this movie, they're like, no rat torture. Hellraiser was first given an X rating by the MPAA, and Barker had to cut several scenes to secure an R. These scenes included 2.5 shots of the first hammer murder, including a shot of a hammer lodged in the victim's head.
Oh, nice. The actor playing a different murder victim felt that he should be nude during the film's. That nude murder was shot, but later replaced with a semi-clothed scene. Damn it.
Right. And scenes of Frank being pulled apart by the Cenobites' hooks were shortened, and a scene of his head exploding was removed entirely.
Yeah, but how short could you go? I mean, like, you get it when it happens.
I mean,
less is more.
Yeah.
Hellraiser holds a 72% on Rotten Tomatoes with an audience score of, 72%. The site's consensus reads, elevated by writer-director Clive Barker's fiendishly unique vision, Hellraiser offers a disquieting and sadistically smart alternative to mindless gore.
Kim Newman, writing for the Monthly Film Bulletin, noted that the most immediately striking aspect of the movie is its seriousness of tone, in an era when horror films, the Nightmare on Elm Street or Evil Dead films in particular, tend to be broadly comic. Newman stated that the film suffers from a few minor compromises, notably a decision made fairly late in shooting to change the specifically English setting for a more ambiguous and unbelievable mid-Atlantic one. Newman also noted that the Cenobites were well-used suggestive figures, but their monster companion is more blunderingly obvious concession to the gross-out tastes of the teenage drive-in audience. Newman concluded that the film was a return to the cutting edge of horror cinema, and that, in more gruesome moments, the film is a reminder of the grand Guignol intensity that has recently tended to disintegrate into lazy splatter.
My God, this person was paid by the word.
I mean, and I just can't be bothered with it, obviously.
Roger Ebert gave the film 1/2 of a star out of 4 and deemed it as dreary a piece of goods as has masqueraded as horror in many a long, cold night.
Jesus.
This is one of those movies you sit through with mounting dread as the fear grows inside you that it will indeed turn out to be feature-length. And that this is a movie without wit, style, reason, and the true horror is that actors were made to portray and the technicians to realize its bankruptcy of imagination.
Jesus.
Fuck yeah. That's bullshit. Anyway, the New York Times said that the effects are not bad, only damp. Don't know what that means, but...
Jesus, Robert.
Soggy. They're a little soggy. Well, get ready for the other movies.
Don't do it. It does have some accolades, though. At the Saturn Awards, it was nominated for Best Horror Film, Best Music, and Best Makeup.
The actual winner that year was The Lost Boys for Best Horror Movie, although it was a really good year for horror because they were up against Evil Dead 2, Near Dark, A Nightmare on Elm Street, 3, Dream Warriors, and Pumpkinhead.
That's a really good amount of good horror movies. 1987 was a good year.
And those are just the ones that were nominated.
So Hellraiser was followed by 9 sequels, most of which were direct-to-video. Doug Bradley appeared as Pinhead in 7 of them total.
Yeah.
So,
well, let's just get into it.
Yes, let's get into all the fucking sadomasochism of it all.
Yeah. So I feel like this cast is pretty good, pretty there, starting, led by, I want to say, Claire Higgins as, British Meg Foster.
Yes, British Meg Foster. I do love her in this movie.
Now, her eyes aren't quite as striking as Meg Foster's, but she does do a good stand-in for like a cross between Joan Collins or Joan Crawford, one of those Joans, and Meg Foster.
Yeah, when I was watching it this time around, I don't know that I've ever really noticed this before, but I was just like, oh my God, it's Meg Foster. It's British Meg Foster. Like, really?
She doesn't really come into her own really until like the second film, or at least the last third of this one. I don't think, she doesn't really have much to do here as far as like having her own agency in the first like part of this. She's really just like a slave to that D.
For real though. I mean, like she spends the greater part of this movie like pining after Dick. And, she's willing to do some unspeakable things, but I don't think that she's that evil deep down.
No, I think she was an opportunist because, she horny, but also she didn't catalyze any of this, right? No. It was Frank who did it, right? But it was actually her husband that she ended up cheating on that bled on the floor that did this, right? That was not a plan of hers.
No, I mean, she was.
Or if it was, we're not shown any information about that.
No, I mean, I feel like she was seduced, obviously, by Frank and, really acted on that seduction and the memory of it. And but I feel like as the movie progresses, she may have gotten more into the murders or whatever. But I mean, for the first one, she really seems unsure of herself or whether or not she even can do this sort of thing.
And I almost feel like, I haven't read the Hellbound Heart, but I almost feel like she really is the main character here, or should be. In a way, because she is kind of along for the ride in a way until she has to make that choice. But they really do take some care to set her up as unhappy. Yeah. Right. They've just moved to where we don't know. Is the UK? Is it New England? We don't fucking know. There's a mistake in the script here. I think they changed midway through filming where it was set, what the setting was. So some of the lines don't really make sense, but it does set it up very, very, very clearly that she is unhappy and why she's unhappy.
And we will talk about the Hellbound Heart a little bit, later on in this conversation. But you're right. I mean, like for the movie's sake, she is sort of the main character of this, right? Everything is happening around this character, really. And I mean, it's a good, flashy role. I mean, I remember it, and looking back over the other sequels that I've seen, I haven't seen all of them. I mean, I really enjoy like this basic story of her killing people to bring her lover back to life, essentially.
I feel like it would have been really easy for her to chew the scenery or for them to have found an actress to do that. Like if it was
like
directed by like Peter Jackson back then or Sam Raimi back then, this would have been a completely different movie.
Yeah. Oh, I completely agree.
But, in steps in what is actually supposed to be our hero, which is Kirsty Cotton, played by Ashley Lawrence.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like she's not always remembered in the pantheon of final girls so much as like Laurie Strode, or Heather Thompson.
She just happens to be kind of be there, right?
Nancy Thompson.
She's kind of like in every girl.
Yeah. I mean, she's there. She's followed her father to wherever they've moved to, either England or New England, right? Even she's not sure.
We're given a little bit of information, I think she's kind of ambivalent to the marriage situation, right? But that she is kind of independent.
Yeah.
Like her dad's still trying to coddle her, but she's saying like, no, I'm on my own now.
That's right. I have got my own room and I have a job in a pet store, Daddy.
Yeah, but she's still calling him Daddy. And I guess, a lot of people do, but she's more independent now, but she's feeling pretty protected, just like her dad's protective of her.
Yes,
and so that kind of kicks off the conflict in this, right? Obviously, there's a supernatural thing that's happening here very organically, but she's there to protect her father from adultery and then later murder, and then it just kind of goes off the rails. Purposefully.
And I mean, once she does figure out like the supernatural component to the story, I mean, she really tries to she doesn't back down from any of it. You know what I mean? Like she bargains with them immediately. Like she does hold her own in really good final girl fashion, I feel.
But it's really interesting that we're talking about this because, I didn't really think of this in comparison to some of the other horror films of that era, certainly the 80s. But this really is a story about women.
Yes. I mean, I would agree too. I'm
in a way that like Scream isn't, or even Nightmare on Elm Street isn't, right?
No, I mean, they have central female characters, but this entire story is sort of female driven on both the ends of Julia and Kirsty, like two separate sides of women in this like familiar area.
Definitely.
But that also brings us to her father, Larry Cotton, who's played by Andrew Robinson, who I feel like I've seen in lots of things. But when I look at his filmography, I'm like, I haven't seen any of these movies.
Yeah, I don't know. And then like Sean Chapman as Frank Cotton, his brother. They don't look anything alike. No. I think they dubbed him over in the first movie because he was British. Yeah. And they dubbed him over later because they changed the setting. Mm-hmm. But then it's his own voice in the second one.
Yeah.
but doing an American accent. So I don't even.
Yeah. I mean, like that.
It's like they redubbed, but they didn't get the actor back because they probably didn't even ask him if he could do an American accent, which he could.
And I feel like when they decided to make that location change, a lot of it was done post-production, right? Like, yeah, pickup and whatnot. So, yeah.
And knowing how fly by night it was, like that ending effects, like famously was done like in 24 hours.
Shit.
He found like some Greek guy off the street and like got drunk and they did the effects overnight.
Holy shit.
Like hand painted them. Like, right. So like the American dub was probably done by like, Max from accounting or something,
No, Max from accounting and Karen from finance, please come in and say these lines. I mean, there's even some parts in the movie where she brings one guy home and he's an American, right? By sound. And then the next one is plainly British or something, or maybe vice versa. And I'm like, how many British people live in New England?
Or how many people were dubbed? I don't understand. But anyway, I do want to kind of see because it was filmed, like the whole naked one, like it kind of reminds me of the Under the Skin bit.
Oh yeah.
Where the male body is like gazed upon and the male body is victimized.
Yeah, but I feel like some of the guys that she brought home are kind of dumpy, and I don't know if I want to see that.
Yeah.
Man, I mean, it's still a nude murder scene is better than a clothed murder scene, always.
Yeah.
And forever. What do you feel about Sean as Frank Cotton, aside from the voice dub?
I mean, the voice dub really is not really helping him out.
No.
At all. It's just like, he's got this like really deep kind of like straight voice that's not really matching his face. Mm-hmm. It's a lot better in the second movie for him. But I think this is overall a serviceable cast. I can't really say much to them. They didn't really do much heavy lifting other than just like saying the lines and doing the thing.
That's right. I mean, they're just there to sort of like push the story along.
Really, it's about Claire Higgins' performance, and Ashley Lawrence and maybe Andrew Robinson. And obviously the huge standout being Doug fucking Bradley.
Hell yes.
As Pinhead.
I mean, it didn't take much to make him an iconic horror villain.
No.
Really.
Well, it took a lot, obviously, because it's like 6 hours of makeup, right?
Well, I mean, he's not in the movie all that much.
He's not. Famously, like he's people expect this whole story to revolve around Pinhead, but he is literally just there as like a function of what's happening.
That's it.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, the times that he is on screen, Doug Bradley really does like sink his teeth into that. It seems like he's enjoying it and doing it a good job. He makes it scary and like theological at the same time, right? Yeah,
there used to be this like anecdote about how he was actually like working as a technician. Like he's an actor, but he was like working as a technician on the movie. And they were like, hey, the person we were going to have do this, like we haven't really filled it. Like someone dropped out. Hey, could you like step in and see how you do in the makeup? I don't know how true that is. I know that he had been in acting, at least stage acting, 10 years prior and done some other things. But when you see him, especially in the second movie or in real life, he does not look like an obvious guy. He's got big, giant ears, and he's just he looks like average McPlane rap, like British guy with big ears.
He looks like someone's British uncle.
And you don't even notice his ears when he's Pinhead because he's got all those fucking pins coming out.
That's right. He's got all the pins in his head and he's wearing that like black robe with all the cuts around his nipples and
he
abs.
Looks strangely ageless as Pinhead. Like he 10 years later, he looks exactly the same as he did from the first movie because of all that makeup.
It's amazing what makeup effects can do.
Really, those contacts are doing a lot of heavy lifting because he's got like these bright blue eyes in reality.
But it's like super dark.
But anyway, more about him later. Yeah. What were some of your thoughts just casually watching this and going through it?
Well, honestly, the thing that really bothers me the most about this movie, right, is that the box is supposed to be sort of like unsolvable. They make it sound like it's a challenge, right? Like you're sitting there, he's all sweaty. And maybe because I've read the book too, that it's supposed to be difficult to solve this box.
Oh, I never got that.
The movie doesn't make it seem that way. It seems like you pick it up, turn it over a couple times and run your thumb around the circle and bam, you got Cenobites.
It depends on who's using it. Like I figure like they got the puzzle girl from the second movie, but we're going to cover that next week. But I mean, I always felt like it was like a tool. Like it's not difficult or easy. It's just you have to know how to use it. Right.
I mean, and that could be the case. I feel like if they have to find someone special to solve the box, like then it should be difficult, I
feel like in her case, like it's trial and error. Like it opens this way, like this where it's not a cube anymore. Then it opens hell, and she puts it back. Then it's not.
I mean, it seems like Kirsty just does it super fast.
But sometimes she just like shakes it and points at people, and then like
I know. I mean, she's sitting in the hospital and she picks it up and she turns it over 3 times, and then the walls are coming apart. You know what I mean?
It's not. Yeah, throughout these films, it is not consistent whatsoever. And sometimes like it just opens the doors, and the doors are like, I feel like the first few films, the doors to whatever other dimension this is are just like cutting into our reality. Like the wallpaper just like splits apart, you know, or the brick comes apart kind of organically, you know, but in some scenes the chains actually like come out of the box itself.
Right.
In later movies, like sometimes they say like the portal is in the box itself, and so like they make giant versions of it, like, but then the small box can do the same thing. Like it doesn't make sense, and we shouldn't think about it.
And I try not to. It's just that like they spend a lot of time in the novella talking about the box, right? And it's like the way it looks and the way it feels, and they talk about how it is difficult. Like it took Frank a very long time to solve, right? And I kind of like the idea of that. Like you have to work for this, right? If you really want it, you have to work for it. And the thing that bothers me in this movie is that people pick it up and it seems like 5 seconds later, they've solved it, right? And maybe there could be some passage of time, things that I missed in the movie.
There's some editing issues all throughout this series.
Yeah.
And, you know, even though this is the best rated film, it's not immune to that, right? I always felt like, yes, it's a puzzle box, but like the more you know about it, it's like a tool, the easier it is to use, like trial and error. But also I feel like the hard part is obtaining the thing, not necessarily using it.
Yeah. Because he does, I mean, and we don't get to see a lot of that in this movie, but you know, you have to seek out the person to purchase this box. You can't just like find it at the local supermarket.
Or you know, show up in some ruins of some unknown country, you know, like Doug Bradley's character did apparently at the beginning of the next movie that we're going to talk about. You know, you never know what's going to pop up. And also in the second one, there's multiple boxes.
That's right.
So we don't know if those were fakes that he had found or if one of them was real, but it's alluded that, I don't want to talk too much about that next movie, but
I know
it's like it's alluded that he was waiting for that box, and that's the thing that catalyzed the story, but he already had to, so like it doesn't make sense anyway.
I know. Whatever. I mean, a lot of it doesn't make a lot of sense, but I mean that's like the overarching thought that I have to this is that like everything else is so like in your face and easy to understand, but the box itself like is sort of a puzzle to me, if you will. I'm like, come on,
make it make sense. I mean, like we could get into like soft and hard magic systems and stuff like that. Like that's a thing in literature, but this is a physical object that does something specific, right? So like it should follow some rules, and the writers, directors, they don't really give a shit as long as it's just like a catalyst, you know, it's you know, whatever George Lucas and Steven Spielberg used to call their objects for their movies, the MacGuffin.
A MacGuffin. Okay.
Yeah.
Which is something that like Hitchcock talked about a lot, you know? So, but yeah, I mean, like the box is every time I watch the movie, it's like my main focus for some reason.
But what I'm focused on is its beautiful design, because there's a lot of design that went into this. Obviously, there's a lot of iconic imagery in this that spawned an entire franchise for a reason, right? I don't think he really envisioned a huge franchise from this, right? I think that it's the design that really makes it just leap off the screen, and that's Pinhead, and that's this fucking box, and the box is iconic.
And those are the two things that really created a franchise for this. I feel like if they didn't put enough thought into both the Cenobites, Pinhead especially, and that box, and creating some sort of lore around it, there wouldn't be a franchise. This would be a one-off movie.
Yeah.
So,
well, zooming back into the movie itself, we've already talked about the location confusion. Let's talk about that iconic resurrection scene.
Oh my God! Yes.
My God, the first of all, Christopher Young's iconic score, the Resurrection Waltz. I don't know how much was taken by that original band. I know he took some cues, but knowing his later work, you know, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. You know, I want to give most of the credit to him, but just like everything was working for some of these key scenes here, just beautifully constructed, and this was nasty.
Yes.
Watching this thing like kind of rebuild itself reverse style, like, you know, organs coming together and skin and slime and blood and pus and everything else, just like building something over like this beautiful kind of, you know, waltz music is like nothing. I haven't seen really anything quite before it or since.
No, I feel like the music is really working for this movie in many, many places, but especially that particular moment. And you're right, it is nasty. There's so many like gross out moments throughout this franchise of movies, right? But the first one I feel like is kind of gross, like through a lot of it, right? Like I think I was eating ice cream when I was watching it, and I had to put it down. I was just like, no, it's
very
a little
rare
too squishy.
Because the camera lingers and it looks good because it's all in camera.
And I feel like these effects really stand up today. That's not
all of the in-camera effects do, and that's the next scene that we're going to talk about as well.
I know my favorite part of that resurrection scene though is when like it finally has its arms formed and the spinal cord is formed and it like bends down and connects to the brain that's forming separate from it. Yeah. It's just so fucking neat and gnarly and just disgusting, and I love it.
And it's all just like James Cameron-esque reverse photography. Like,
oh my god.
And it's just done so well, and and they've got it melting, and then they've got it collapsing in certain ways, so that when they reverse it and all these different constructed shots, it looks like it's being built and coming together and forming kind of magically. And since it's all photographed rather than like animated or computer generated or anything like that, because let's face it, this is 1987. Mm-hmm. It still looks good, and there's a reason, because it's all actually fucking filmed.
And I think it's neat. Like parts of it I rewound and watched again because it was good.
Yeah, my favorite, like this was like the hands down like scene that you will like talk about in pop culture. For me, like the best constructed scene was actually the original reveal for Pinhead versus that resurrection of Frank. And this is in the asylum, and Kirsty is like seeing it all happen. She solved the box. She brought the box with her, or they brought the box to her in the asylum, apparently.
And they're like, this will jog your memory.
This will jog your memory. Yeah. And so she solves it, and she's in this cell essentially, right? Where there's like white tile. So it all just like turns black. Mm-hmm. And then it's backlit from behind the steam coming out through the grout lines in that tile. And at the same time, there's a music cue that's just that. It's just like really foreboding. And then she starts hearing the noises, and then like her drip or whatever in the bag, the hospital drip, starts just like turns into blood and explodes. Like all kinds of shit is happening. And then we get that iconic Pinhead reveal, where, he'll tear your soul apart, demons to some, angels to others, all that stuff that is so iconic. And it's such a great reveal scene. It's like the standout scene for me outside of that resurrection waltz in this movie.
I mean, I have to agree. I mean, I really like that. I wish that they would have used that as the first time we see the Cenobites in the movie, because I mean we briefly see them in the very beginning after they've ripped apart Frank's body. Yes. They don't say anything. They're
we see like lights behind the floorboards and the walls and stuff, but it's not quite the same. It doesn't hit the same way.
No, it doesn't.
As that hospital.
I mean, we see one like putting the pieces of his face back together, so obviously they like puzzles too. But I mean, and that's it. I wish that we would have just seen sort of Frank die, and then have this be the moment where we first get to see all of them. I mean, because I feel like it's a much better introduction and a lot more shocking, right? When he finally gets to say things.
Yes.
What do you think about the other Cenobites?
I love it when like the other Cenobites just seem like equals. They don't seem like they're followers to me. They seem like he is basically the mouth of them. He's the voice of them, but speaks for them. Like they seem like a group to me. They all seem like they're part of some sort of like monastic religion or something, what I mean? And that's what Cenobites really means, right? And so, I love that one of them just like goes straight to Kirsty. There's no struggle. He just puts her fingers right in its mouth.
That's right.
It just like shoves its two fingers in her mouth. Like it's just like every day, this is what I do for a living.
And that's what... That's what he does do for a living.
Yeah.
That was the chattery one, right? He like just storms up to her and like, yeah.
Like you might be a grocery bagger here, but in hell, you're like sticking fingers in people's mouths to shut them up.
Don't pay attention to my day job by night. Yeah, I really like these Cenobites in this movie.
Gloved or gloveless?
How about one of each? The chatterer who's got its face pulled back and his teeth are like constantly moving, right? And then we have one called Butterball.
Yeah, the one with the Matrix glasses on.
Yeah, he's got the Matrix glasses, constantly licking his lips and shit. And then we have Lady Cenobite with her throat pulled back, open, vagina style.
I wonder if this actually kind of inspired the Matrix a little bit. In a way, the Matrix people are from another dimension coming into this world,
That's true.
They're all wearing the same costumes.
I mean, they have a Cenobite aesthetic.
And Morpheus does chatter a lot.
If only someone got their finger stuck in someone's mouth. I don't know. But yeah, no, I think that scene is really good. And like, we really get an idea of who Pinhead is and who these Cenobites are really, right? Where they come from. Yeah. And it's one of the only times in the movie that they really start to talk about, the distinctions between like pleasure and pain and maybe not being able to differentiate between the two of them.
Yeah.
I feel like it's sort of discussed briefly in the movie, but not really talked about.
They're really much more like gray area here. Much later in the series, they start getting more and more satanic in their nature, especially with the third one.
But it's really not about hell. Not in this one.
No.
I mean, it doesn't necessarily, they don't have to come from hell. They just come from somewhere else.
Or arguably even the second one, even though they mention hell a bunch of times, this is my personal hell, or, that's this hell,
But yeah, no, I mean, I think Cenobites are great. And I feel like, we get to see more of them later on in the franchise. And but I think in this one, they're used like just enough to make them memorable.
No, it's the perfect amount. Julia is a great villain.
She really fucking is, though.
It sets her up, she kind of ends very quickly in this, but it sets her up for that next one where we really, really get to see Julia as a villain. And it's just delicious.
I mean, I do like her as a villain in this movie, too, because I think she comes into her villainous in her own time throughout the movie, too. She seems kind of meek and unhappy in the beginning, like we talked about earlier. But by the end of this, like, she is like reveling in the fact that her husband has been murdered and her lover's wearing his skin. You know what I mean? She didn't want to sleep with her husband, but she sure as hell is sleeping with someone wearing his skin,
Yeah, I wasn't clear on whether Frank actually got his skin back and was just wearing that to fool Kirsty or to hide from the Cenobites.
Well, no, I think he wasn't fully regenerated and he had the opportunity to put that skin on.
Yeah.
So, and then because I feel like he thought he was just like one or two.
That's another thing. Kirsty comes in there. He's like bleeding at the temples and ears, everywhere where the seams of the skin are. And he's like, I'm fine. And she's like, okay, everything's normal.
Can I just see the body though?
Yeah. That's when like the script is a slave to what's being portrayed on screen and it's or vice versa. And it's, they need to do some adjustments.
I mean, I really don't. I mean, I realize that Frank is also a villain in this movie, but I think Julia is a much better villain because she's doing most of the.
Frank is Frank,
work.
like Frank is just,
He's just a horny, skinless man.
Yeah.
Who wants to fuck his niece.
Yeah.
I mean, like,
he wants to fuck everything, really.
Honestly. I mean, like in the book, he's real fucking horny.
Yeah.
You know that.
Well, like I keep mentioning the second film because it literally starts off the second. This one ends, right? So you could really watch these two as one long movie if you wanted to.
That's right.
And that's kind of how I view them.
They do have like an extended flashback sequence, but
yeah, at the beginning, like a very needless, like 10-minute, like expositions. Like I guess people didn't have streaming back then, obviously. They couldn't pick it up. Maybe the VHS rentals were like, a little thin on the ground. So they had to remind everyone that the first movie existed,
That's right.
But
and here's what happened.
These days you'd never see that.
No. And if you did, it'd be a lot more brief.
Yeah.
So, well, I've kind of been skirting around it a little bit, but do you want to talk about the original material, the Hellbound Heart, for a second?
Please.
So, I mean, it's written by Clive Barker, who's one of our most important gays, right? At least in the artistic writing community, mayhaps. I mean, his work is kind of prolific at this point. He's written lots and lots of things, and lots of movies have been made about his work. Some good, some just trashy. But the Hellbound Heart, the novella is, I mean, it's different in many ways from the movie. Like most glaringly, Kirsty in that book is not Larry's daughter. His name's not Larry in that either, but she's like sort of a family friend who's in love with him and jealous of Julia, right? But she hangs out with them just to be around Larry, right? And she makes no like qualms about wanting to be with him. And
so it's a little more naughty. It's a little less Reagan's America.
Yes. And so, but she does want to save him from everything that's going on. So she does become sort of the heroine of that novella, trying to save this man from what's going on. There's still a skinless corpse living up in the attic, and Julia's still bringing men home to let him feed off of. But
yeah, and I know this is written by Clive Barker on both sides, but I wonder how much he decided to kind of tone that down versus studio. I'm not sure.
I mean, I don't feel like Clive Barker would have done a lot of changes to his source work. Because, I mean, he, like we said earlier, he didn't like some of the film adaptations of his novels, and he wanted to do one of his own. Mm-hmm. And he still made some changes. I think that the changes that he makes work. I think that making Kirsty the daughter instead of some like quasi love interest works for this movie. It provides some sort of like,
it's just strange because he wrote it literally right before filming it, and then literally like the next year the sequel was already out. It's like all of this is within like a year and a half was like, why would he change it right after writing it? You know what I mean?
I mean, it's true, but I feel like the sequel came out because money, you know, like when things become popular and make money, of course they're going to have a sequel.
And who knew? Like he could have been holding on to that manuscript or whatever for years. It might not have it might have just been published in 1986.
It's true.
In you know, to get people maybe excited about the movie coming out. I don't know.
I think that it was included in like a volume of short horror novels, and then he later published it on its own. But I think that may have come after the film even. So this could have just been in some sort of like tome that you had to find. Mm-hmm. But the novel itself talks more about the sadomasochistic qualities of everything that's going on, right?
Yeah.
And the Cenobites talk more about like providing pleasure and saying that like, yes, we're going to give you the pleasure that you want. It just may not be the definition of pleasure that you have, right? So there's a lot more of a be careful what you wish for kind of aspect to it.
Yeah.
You know, which I like that better. I wish that this movie would have had a lot more to say about like reaching the end of like a sexual addiction or something like that and trying to find something to make yourself a little more excited.
Yeah, like kind of like a slippery slope, be careful what you wish for type of thing. And it's hard to articulate that, right? Because I don't even really understand it. I've never been into or experienced BDSM or anything like that. And I know that some people really get kicks out, you know, out of like getting like hooks in their skin and hanging and, you know, or fucking David Carradining themselves or
I mean we don't kink shame, obviously. I mean, like if it gets you off, it gets you off, and there's nothing wrong with that, you know. But I feel like if you're gonna have a movie that's sort of like based upon that, like seeking out new experiences, like spend a little bit more time talking about it. I also realize it's 1987.
Yeah, I feel like, you know, like they had Cruising, maybe they maybe they watched that first. I don't know.
And they're like, well, we can't go that direction. Let's tone it down just a little bit, you know. I feel like, you know, moving forward, we might have a little bit more of that conversation in any Hellraiser movies that come after.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it's a good novella. It's a quick read. I think you can listen to it in like 3 hours. It's totally worth it.
Okay.
But it's a lot more British. Like it's a very British novella.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, like obviously it has a lot to do with sex, pleasure, pain, you know, the blurred lines between those at both of their heights. And there's a continuing theme in all of these movies that starts off with this one about adultery and death, right? We see it again and again and again in this franchise, specifically this one and the next one, betrayal, and we see it. And I've forgotten what the third one. You watched it recently, and I haven't. With the fourth one, again, there's an adultery theme and things like that. And I'm wondering what he has to say about unhappy marriages or having those kinks and having to something that you still need to be fulfilled in, you know, and then that resulting in kind of a debaucherous or letting yourself indulge too much and ending in, you know, pain, death, discomfort. I
mean, yeah, I feel like adultery in horror movies especially is one of those like sins that get you killed for. You know what I mean? It's equivalent to like just teenagers having sex and doing drugs.
It's almost as if he's saying adultery is one of those kinks that's kind of an indulgence.
I mean, I'm sure that's true. I mean, perhaps like the thrill of getting caught, you know, or the thrill of doing something that you know is completely wrong. You know, I will say that like when Julia first had sex with Frank, she wasn't married yet, right? But they were fucking having sex on her wedding dress. You know what I mean? And so like he really drives that adultery theme like home visually, especially in that moment. But I mean, like the death part that goes with it, you're right. It does follow for the rest of the franchise. Like if someone is committing adultery, like there's death to follow for sure.
Oh yeah.
And as far as like Frank goes,
it's more of an adult message than some of the others that were happening in the 80s that were seemingly moral messages, whether conscious or not, about premarital sex or, you know.
Well, and I think that's what separates this from a lot of 80s movies. I think in the 80s, people were spending a lot of time in horror movies talking about like what children are doing or teenagers are doing and trying to send a moral message their way.
This is adult horror.
And this is adult horror. You know, this is adult body horror about the choices that you make being an adult, you know, and what the consequences would be for you as an adult, right?
There's also religious or cult overtones with that. And I'm wondering what the connection or the Venn diagram is that he would say with that. Maybe that at its height of organization, that it might be more of a religious experience, like you're experiencing God with this level of pain and pleasure. Because obviously, like he's come up with this concept of the Cenobites as a communal order that seemingly worship pain itself. And later in the second one, the Leviathan god of the labyrinth, rather than any kind of obvious satanic figure, almost Lovecraftian.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I feel like there's some connective tissue here with stories like In the Mouth of Madness or Event Horizon, and mayhaps they should have just cast Sam Neill. Because he's in both of those.
I can see, I think it's funny that we have a gay man writing this, right, at a time when there was lots of religious persecution to gay men and AIDS, right? The religious right was constantly having something to say about the way that gay men were having sex and leading their own lives.
Certainly in the second half of the 80s, yeah. Because we see Cruising as kind of like a midpoint where it was like, in the late 70s and early 80s, it's going to be more and more and more okay to be gay and talk about it and show it on film. And then like AIDS happened,
and it was
83, 84, 85. And then after that, it was just like, Reagan's bullshit,
Yes. And so I think that this is Barker's answer to that, really. He's taking, a religious order saying that sex is bad, and he's creating one that says sex is good and deviant kinds of sex is good, right? These people are there to show you pleasure. And like they said earlier, it may not be the pleasure that you want, but we'll give it to you. And I think it's just a really nice, like, juxtaposed look at what was actually going on in 1987 and what's going on in this movie. Mm-hmm. I mean, this movie is sex positive, sort of, but...
Yeah, in a weird way.
Yeah, in a really weird,
roundabout,
twisty way.
Yeah.
But
it's not making any moral judgments.
At all. I mean...
Which is interesting for showing demons that prey upon the people that are looking for that, but they're still not making a judgment. It's a fine line to walk, and they achieved it.
And I don't see them as demons. And he says that we're demons to some and angels to other, but we're none of those things. We're just explorers, come to show you what we found. And I think that it's really neat. I will say that I think a lot of people view sex as maybe a religious experience, or it's like the height of like experience itself, right? And if you just grow tired of everything that you get, I don't think it's unfounded for someone to seek something out to recapture that kind of experience.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And it's these types of conversations and ideas that are just below the surface in this movie that make it so successful and so different than anything that came out around it, and still so different today.
Yes, I agree. I think this movie holds up very, very well. And I think that there's a lot of things going on in this movie. I think that there's a lot of things that it's saying, and you can get those things on multiple watches. I feel that people haven't even sort of scratched the surface of talking about what this movie can be about.
Yeah. And that said, it's not a perfect movie. I mean, we're not blowing we're not blowing the D.
No, Julia's doing that.
Julia's doing that. There's a lot of editing issues. There's like production design issues and stuff like that. But at its height, this is very special and remains to be special.
Agreed.
So I want to talk about a little bit of the creation of those icons, like Pinhead, the Lament configuration, which is the actual name of the puzzle box, right? Mm-hmm. So like we talked a little bit about this in the 80s, like Pinhead versus like Freddy versus Jason, like creating those icons to sit up against each other. It's like stoicism versus comedy, or intelligence versus like force of nature, in like Michael Myers or Jason, comedy being like Freddy. And so they're tapping into like Christopher Lee's Dracula or even Hannibal Lecter in Pinhead here. And that's what really I think they wanted to do with some of these Cenobites, was to make kind of an ambivalent organizer of or priest even of a bad guy, someone that doesn't really care and is kind of doing a job, but has nothing to say about, they don't have a skin in the game, No. There's no moral judgment here. They're not punishing anyone, other than maybe like their cop like role of going like pulling people back into hell that try and cheat their situation, But I thought that was an interesting juxtaposition compared to the other 80s icons that were being set up at the time.
Yeah, no, I agree. Because you have people like Jason and Michael Myers who say nothing at all, right? And then you get the other opposite of that, which is Freddy, who doesn't shut the fuck up ever, right? And so like you have
prime time, bitch.
I mean, he's got something quippy to say all the time. And you have sort of Pinhead in the middle. And I think he chooses his words carefully. And I feel like
very eloquent.
Yeah.
The Garden of Eden.
Yes. I mean, he has something very poetic to say all the time about what he's doing,
Yeah.
right? I will say that in later movies, he does sometimes get a little quippy, but he will always find himself like sort of sermonizing what's going on.
We are explorers of the physical experience. You know, like
Exactly.
he's a little bit elevated there.
I mean, like Freddie would never say anything like that. And
Yeah.
I think this is what makes...
Freddie would gag before
he would choke on those words. But I feel like this is what separates Pinhead from the rest of them, like you said, right? Creating an icon in that. And I mean,
he's like the adult in the room.
right. I mean, and he's like, I really like that. I mean, he shows up because people want him to. And he's like, well, you called us. We came, you know, like now you have to deal with it.
You called, we came.
And here it is.
As eloquent and elevated as he is straight to the point.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, I like him.
Now, Doug Bradley revealed in an interview that he asked Clive Barker how he should play Pinhead. And Barker told him to think of him as a cross between an administrator and a surgeon who's responsible for running a hospital where there are no wards, only operating theaters, as well as being the man who wields the knife, and he's the man who has to keep the timetable going.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. And he went on to say, a line from one of Clive's plays swam into my mind as I was playing this character. I am in mourning for my humanity. At this point, there was no backstory for the character, but I discussed this with Clive, and we had agreed that he had been once human. But whether this was yesterday, last week, last year, 10, 100, or 1,000 years ago, I didn't know. I didn't need to know. Sufficient to have that idea logged into my brain. A perpetual, unconscious grieving for the man he had once been, for a life and a face he couldn't even remember, and a frozen grief. I felt now that Pinhead existed in an emotional limbo where neither pain nor pleasure could touch him. A pretty good definition of hell for me.
That's pretty fucking eloquent too.
Yeah, Doug Bradley, are you actually Pinhead?
Look at this.
Oh my God.
Put a lot of thought into that character who was on screen for 15 minutes in this movie or less.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's good. I mean, he seems like a well-trained actor. And I will say about Clive Barker's writing, he's very flowery, right? He has a Dickensian proclivity.
Oh.
When he writes, he's not like Stephen King. And Stephen King also has a proclivity, you know, that he writes well, but Clive Barker writes in a more poetic sense, maybe because he's British.
Oh, maybe.
But I mean, like, just reading that sounds like something that Clive Barker would have written. You know what I mean? It makes sense that they would come up with that backstory.
I only got one more note here, and it's about the limit configuration. Obviously, the infamous six-sided puzzle box. It was conceived and designed by Simon Says. Simon Says. Simon Says. I'm not sure who that is, but I want to find out.
Simon Versace?
Simon Versace. Some of you have not pronounced it Versace, and it shows. So I know we're like starting to come up at time, but I really want to talk about the music for a second.
We have to.
We have to. So Barker originally wanted the electronic music group Coil, as you mentioned, to perform the music for the film, but that notion was rejected by the production company New World. So editor Tony Randall then suggested Christopher Young as a replacement for Coil in the film's score. Christopher Young had already done several horror films, such as The Power and A Nightmare on Elm Street 2. So amongst a veritable slew of drama, action, and thriller films, he would go on to be extremely prolific in the horror genre specifically. And I think he was like a runner-up to our top composers when we were doing that.
Yeah.
And I think this score specifically for Hellraiser and that waltz was, I think, may have been in both of our top 10s.
It was.
Right? And so some of those horror films that he's done, or horror adjacent films, would have been obviously Hellraiser 2, following up with this, The Fly 2, Species, Virtuosity, Copycat,
Yay.
our very first, Urban Legend, The Gift, which I think we did a bonus episode on recently, The Exorcism of Emily Rose, The Grudge 2, Drag Me to Hell, which is possibly the greatest, like, if you're going to look up a horror score in a dictionary, that's what plays, right?
It's so good.
Sinister, and The New Pet Cemetery, and The Empty Man, which I really love. Very underrated score.
I didn't realize he did the Empty Man score.
He has a really good, like, ancient woodwind sound that he does with, like, the Cthulhian stuff in Empty Man that reminds me of the kind of stuff that he was doing for the Leviathan and in Hellraiser 2, and some of like the quick brass hits or things like you would do for the Cenobites in this movie. So he's capable of a huge amount of range. And just looking at how prolific he is in the genre, I almost want to go back and say, you know, just on like the stuff that he's done alone, you know, outside of the biggest hits by like Jerry Goldsmith or something like that, like I feel like not only a runner up, but he deserves like a tie or something. I don't know, at the very least, but
I would say, I mean, at this point, because I didn't realize that he did some of these movies, and I really like it when a composer will sort of niche themselves to a genre of film, right? And because it gets them, you know, really into it. I want to go back and like listen to some of these.
I only picked out these. He's done like 50 more like thrillers and dramas and things like that you would know.
Oh my God, I love it.
Yeah, he is a hugely prolific, but he's not scared of horror movies and will keep coming back to them. And that's something I love. But if you're interested, the score that Coil recorded, which is a total of 9 tracks, can be found on their compilation CD entitled Unnatural History 2, Smiling in the Face of Perversity.
What a good title.
I don't know if that's on streaming or not. I'm going to have to look it up and listen to it because I just created these notes before recording and I have not had the chance to listen to that, but I am interested to see.
It's got to be somewhere on YouTube.
Because Clive Barker said he chose them because they like moved his bowels or something. Like,
God.
It's like, so I don't know in what way. Like, pain, pleasure. In what way? Clive Barker.
He's a gay man, so it could be many, many ways.
Carnival Barker.
I think that we're doing this deep dive at just the right time because there is another sort of remake reboot coming out this year.
Yeah.
Right? On Hulu.
Yeah, I believe that's a movie. There was some argument between us or question between us whether that was going to be a series or a movie, but I believe it's a movie.
It could quite possibly be. I haven't, because we talked about it as a news item on a Shooting the Flames episode, and it was so long ago when they announced this, and it's finally coming to fruition, but it's listed on IMDb, so it could be a film, but I know they also list TV series. I mean, Hulu at this point, they really have a good stake in the game for film as well.
Wikipedia references it as a film.
Okay, we should go with film.
And I know that they chose film directors and writers to do it.
Okay.
And that it was finished shooting in like 6 weeks or so, and that's not something.
No, that's not a TV series. No.
Yeah. So, but I think we're both legitimately excited for this year's remake of that. We're so rarely excited for a remake because the film was directed by David Bruckner with a screenplay by Ben Collins and Luke Piotrowski with a story by David Goyer, who's done a shit ton of stuff, big stuff. And also that exact team was behind 2021's The Night House, which appeared on both of our top 10s this year, very high.
Yeah, very, very
number one or number twos, right? And so we're very excited about this team. And on top of that, Clive Barker is returning to produce. And interestingly, I think we reported early on like a Shooting the Flames when we were talking about this, that the drag queen Gottmik might be playing Pinhead based on her competition makeup. However, this is not true. Pinhead will actually be played by Jamie Clayton, a trans woman, perhaps best known for her work in the Wachowskis' Netflix series Sense8. Or Sense8, however you say it. But I really loved her in that series, and I think she's going to do great. And I am super excited about this whole team, and they're going to try and do it much closer to the Hellbound Heart.
Which will make me very happy.
Yeah, so it's going to be interesting, and that mayhaps that's why it's not getting a theatrical release, if they go heavily much more into the sexual aspect of it.
I mean, I am very, very excited for this. I can't wait to watch it. And especially because, I mean, like watching this to talk about now, and I haven't seen the original Hellraiser maybe in like 5 or 6 years. So it hasn't been that long, but because I come back to it frequently, but I really want something that's more, you know, close to the source material. And I am happy that Clive Barker is involved because he stopped being involved at some point in the franchise. And so if someone is there giving their like seal of approval to something, I think it speaks very highly of what the work they've created.
I don't know. Like the Clive Barker thing is probably the least of what I'm excited about because he did stick on for executive production for a lot of these. Yeah. And most of them aren't good. So I don't know. We'll see. He came back and he was actually planning to direct one himself. And then it just kind of exploded into this new thing. So
I am happy that there's some trans inclusivity going on.
Yeah.
I feel like.
Yeah. Sometimes I'm a little worried about that. Just because like if they want to specifically show Pinhead as like gender neutral or something, Jamie Clayton is not gender neutral. She is a woman, you know, and so I don't want that to be exploitative, you know, at all of how trans may or may not look. I tend to think that Jamie Clayton looks like a beautiful woman, but I don't know how they're going to do it. So either way, it's going to be like a Pinhead type of character, and they want her to be a little bit different, and Jamie Clayton is a little bit different.
And that's good. I mean, like, differences is what makes a remake good.
Yeah.
Right? If you do it the exact same, they're usually pretty shitty.
Yeah.
All right. Do you have some fun facts for me?
I do.
Oh.
Yeah, I have 3. So the film was originally supposed to be called The Hellbound Heart, obviously. After the novella upon which it was based, the studio decided that the title sounded too much like a romance and asked Clive Barker to change it. So Barker offered Sadomasochistic from Beyond the Grave, which was rejected for the overtly sexual content. He ultimately opened the floor to the production team to offer up their own suggestions, prompting a 60-year-old female crew member to offer up what a woman will do for a good fuck.
I mean, that one's a little on the nose, but a really good title.
Very specific. You almost don't have to watch the movie.
Because that's true. I think I was watching this and I sent Chris a text and I was like, our synopsis should be British Meg Foster kills a series of nooners because she got some good dick. I'm like, that pretty much sums up the movie.
Yep.
Although Sadomasochistic from Beyond the Grave sounds delightful.
Yeah. So one of them should be a subtitle.
Yeah.
During a post-production party when the filming ended, Doug Bradley was dismayed to be ignored by the other members of the crew. He thought he had gotten on rather well with the cast and crew, and it wasn't until later that he realized that none of the crew actually had seen him without his makeup on, so they didn't recognize him.
Aww.
Yeah.
That's good, though. I mean, that's excellent makeup work.
So for the last fun fact, when Clive Barker first showed the film to his mother, she cried tears of joy upon seeing her son's name in the opening credits. He leaned over and whispered that would be the happiest she would be for the next 2 hours.
I'd very much like to meet Clive Barker. Like, if he ever goes to some sort of horror convention, I am there to like meet the man. Well, those were fun. But we have to ask some questions about Hellraiser like we do about every movie we deep dive into. And we're going to start with, if you had this puzzle box, would you open it?
My gut was to say no.
Yeah. I mean, not knowing what would come out of it.
Yeah, if I were to like shove someone into a hell portal or something, otherwise they basically, the people that use the box, they turn you into some sort of Cenobite or whatever. And I don't know, I'm not Lord of Pain, you know what I mean? Like,
not yet. But no, in all seriousness, were you scared while watching Hellraiser?
No. And I can't remember if I was the first time I watched it. I watched this very late in my horror watching
I watched
career.
it very early.
So I want to say no.
I was about 9 or 10 when I first saw this.
Oof.
So I was I was scared, but I was mostly grossed out. You know what I mean? Like, this was one of the most adult things that I saw very early on in my horror career, right? Because I was watching things like Dream Warriors over and over again. And I'm at the video store. I'm like, I haven't seen this. And it's just Pinhead on the front. So I had no idea there was going to be skinless corpses and things like that. And I didn't know that skin was going to be being ripped off of bodies. And so I was really taken aback as a child by this movie.
Yeah.
And I didn't watch it again until my late teenage years. I was so put off by Hellraiser the first time I saw it. Because I was like 10 and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is gross.
Could you imagine watching like Hellraiser and then like The Thing in the same night? It would just totally change your relationship with food for the rest of your life.
I mean, it did on this watch. I'm like eating ice cream. I'm like, no, I got to put this down. Like, it's a little too squishy in my mouth right now. So, I mean, like, Clive Barker really does that well. He grosses you out. Yeah. This is really, really good body horror, in my opinion. It's just, I just watched it way too early.
Yeah.
I found an appreciation much later on in life. So,
yeah, I probably didn't watch it until I was like 25.
Out of 5 stars, what would you rate Hellraiser?
I gave it a 4.
I also gave it 4 stars.
Yeah, it's special. It probably doesn't deserve that 4 on a technical level. There's a lot of problems with it, active problems.
Yeah.
But they're also little and they're so little, but they're also very numerous. But it's also just so special, and there's nothing quite like it. And I like the ideas and the discussion and the thoughts that it kind of engenders.
I agree.
And so I had to land on a 4.
And I feel like the whole is much better than those little problems. You know what I mean?
And I feel like this is different from, I just keep coming back to this. I keep feeling like this is different than exploitational horror. A lot of that was going on in the 80s. And this is really about ideas, and people are passionate about these things and telling and talking about these things. And they're ambitious versus trying to make $1 or scare the shit out of people in an audience. This is having to do with ideas versus feelings. And I feel like that's what really set it apart and still sets it apart.
Well, and I think that moving forward from Hellraiser, I think you can see a definite line in like 80s horror. Early 80s horror is just to make money. It's cookie cutter stuff, right?
A lot of it is. And you know what? I don't want to shit on that stuff.
No, it's good.
It's not that they don't have ideas that they're brain dead, you know, but it's just that they're different. Like, this is adult horror.
Yes.
You know, and that's its differentiation.
And I think that we see a lot more of that moving
while
forward.
still having an icon,
80s.
which is so rare for an adult horror.
I like it. I think it's a really good movie, and it's quick.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's over an hour and a half, but it flies by.
Yeah.
Like the story has a good like sense of timing and pace, and I think it's just an enjoyable watch. You could very easily rewatch this one as well.
It's a classic for a reason.
Yeah. So finally, who's the hottest guy in Hellraiser? Frank.
Yeah.
Uncle Frank, come to daddy.
Definitely not her stupid boyfriend.
No.
He looked like a fucking Brady.
That part where he was like flipping the cigarette into his mouth at the table and whatnot.
Gee whiz.
Oh my God, Kirsty, what was that? What was that spider demon or whatever? The scorpion.
The scorpion baby monster.
Which apparently is called the engineer.
What?
Yeah, it's on Wikipedia.
Or the architect.
No, the architect is something else.
Okay.
This one's called the engineer.
Okay.
I don't know why. I don't know what it does. It seems like it's just crawling along a wall, but whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, Frank, I'm telling you. I mean, when I was younger watching this, I mean, clearly I was already a little
Come to
gay
daddy.
boy.
Okay, daddy.
When he was like sitting shirtless and sweaty in that row of candles, I'm like, I will come to daddy. Love it. Well, I think that just about wraps up our conversation on Hellraiser. We'd like to know what you think about the movie and our conversation. As always, you can find us over on social media at The Film Flamers on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram.
You can email us at tiredqueens@filmflamers.com, or you can call us at 972-666-7733.
Come tear our hole apart.
We have such sights to show you. Zaddy.
Come to daddy.
Angels to some. Dildos to others.
We'll hook you in the very beginning. As Chris mentioned earlier, we are talking about Hellraiser 2, Hellbound, next week, so stay tuned for that.
That's right.
And we had a poll over on patreon.com/thefilmflamers for our patrons over there to choose which Hellraiser sequel we'll be talking about.
That's right. And they have chosen
Hellraiser Bloodline.
That's right. The 4th entry.
That's right. 1996.
Which everyone hates but me. But they voted for, so.
Overwhelmingly.
You voted. We recorded.
Patrons to stop. Also, guys, we have not had a review in quite some time, so head over to Apple Podcasts or iTunes and leave us a 5-star review and why you like us, and we're going to read that on Shooting the Flames.
That's right.
Well, Chris, I think it's time for me to go and tear my hole apart.
I think you said soul.
No. Dildos to others. Those others are me. You want to go have some sweet dreams. Which one does he talk about crying in? Oh, stop crying.
It's a waste of perfectly good suffering.
I'd like to just have a conversation with Bennet.